Live from New Hampshire, it's time for the Science Cafe!
Learn about the latest technologic innovations today.
And you don't have to pay.
Expert panels with advanced degrees are sure to satisfy your curiosity.
Did we mention it's free?
And if you think you'll find a better time than this, then come on down and test your hypothesis. Cause you're gonna learn a lot if you wanna stay down at the Science Cafe.
Anyway, with that introduction, we're here to talk about mating behaviors, which is an interesting topic the day before Valentine's Day. And we are fortunate to have quite a distinguished panel. This was actually an idea that was started by her. So if you don't like it, it's her problem. No, so Lori reached out to me some time ago and asked if we'd be interested in doing a session on mating behaviors. And the committee worked it into the schedule, and here we are tonight. So Lori is an expert on fish, and probably more than that, but that's the one that she talks about. So she's our fish expert. Now, Michelle Beck is at Rivier University. I forgot to say Lori's at St. A's, I think. Michelle's at Rivier University, and she is an expert in birds. So probably more than that as well, but we'll start with birds. And Anna Wallingford is visiting from the UNH Extension, and she is a colleague of Alan Eaton, who was on Science Cafe several times. He's an entomologist, so she's an expert in insects. And then we have Ammara Khan, who is our mammal expert. And she is with the Community College System of New Hampshire. So that's a pretty good cross-section of our local universities. So I'm pleased to see they're all pitching in and allowing their faculty to come and be part of this. So with that, I am no expert in what they're experts in, so I'm going to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves, and then we'll throw it open to questions. And I guess since you're the instigator, we'll start with you and go across the table.
So my name is Lori LaPlante. I'm at St. Anselm College, and I have a pretty varied background. I started in marine biology is really my area, and I got my bachelor's degree at Cal State University Long Beach. So I'm a California girl. I do love the snow. It's okay, but I miss California on days like this. So and then I took a bunch of time off and became a ski bum and traveled, and then came back to University of Connecticut, so to the East Coast. And there I got my PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. And my specialty there was looking at visual signals, mating signals in fish. So I really specialize in visual signals for tropical reef fish, but I also know quite a bit about marine organisms in general. I was very fortunate to land a job at St. Anselm College about 13 years ago. And so I do research there as well as teach. My teaching is I teach animal behavior appropriately. I also teach this semester tropical biology, and in the summer I'll be taking a class down to Belize for our 9th year. So I do a field studies in tropical biology there. And then I teach evolutionary biology because my focus, of course, is the evolution of these mating signals. Why are they, signaling the way that they're signaling? And then biostatistics, which you may think is boring, but it's actually really, really important and very interesting in science. So that is my main background.
So my name is Michelle, and I am interested in birds. And I am actually from North Carolina, even though I don't sound like it. So that's where I came from originally. I got my undergraduate degree at Appalachian State, so up in the mountains there in North Carolina. It's a really pretty place, lots of hiking, and tried skiing and gave up after a few bad spills. So after that, I decided I was going to go get my master's degree, and I went down to Auburn University in Alabama, and I like their weather a little bit better than yours. Still getting used to it here. So went down to Auburn, worked on, so all of my research has been on plumage color in birds. So I'm also interested in visual signals and how the birds can look at each other and basically tell, like, how good is this individual potentially going to be as a mate? How good of a father is this male bird going to be based on his color? And they actually can tell. And also things about genetic quality, like what kind of genetic quality a male has. And so I was interested in that, and I especially as a master's student, I was like, well, all this research is about guys and their signals. And I was like, the women are really being overlooked because female birds, if you guys are familiar with them, some of them actually do have really bright coloration on them. And so I became intrigued by this and wanted to know, do those bright colors on females, do they tell the males the same thing, or do they tell other females the same thing about their quality if they're competing with another female? So for my PhD, I actually decided I wanted to go on a venture. So I went out to Washington State University in Pullman. So that's on the eastern part of Washington, which is not near, like when you think of Washington, you probably think of Seattle and the mountains. This was like a big wheat field. So I went out there for my PhD. I actually drove back to Louisiana every summer so I could do my research. So I studied prothonotary warblers down in Louisiana. Came back to the East Coast for a postdoc at Virginia Tech. And since then, after that, we moved up here, and I've been at Rivier University now. This is my second year. So one of the other things I'm interested in now is how urbanization affects birds. And so actually looking at urban birds versus one that live in more rural habitat, the same species, do they act differently? Do their signals mean the same thing?
I'm Anna Wallingford. I'm actually a New Hampshire native, but I've just recently moved back after 20 years away. I went to Virginia Tech. Got my PhD there. I've had some postdoctoral experience at the USDA Agricultural Research Service in California and in DC. I did a postdoc at Cornell at the Geneva Research Station. So my background is definitely in agriculture. My specialty happens to be insect behavior. But when you work in agriculture and you work in integrated pest management like I do, you do need to be kind of a jack of all trades. So what I will bring to you tonight is the diversity of the insect world for sure. There's plenty of examples of how understanding the behavior of insects, and especially the mating behavior of insects, can contribute to a more ecologically based approach to pest management in a lot of different systems. And also, I mean, you may have heard this before, but whatever kind of depraved sexual fantasy you might dream up of, there's probably somebody on the internet that's selling a pornography that is depicting that. It's very similar in the insect world, where any kind of mating approach or reproductive approach, there's probably an insect out there utilizing that. You'd agree with me? So dream up some kind of scenario, and I bet we can come up with an insect that's doing it right now.
So my name is Ammara Khan. I moved to New Hampshire 2 years ago, and I am associated with the community college system of New Hampshire. My original first degree is in organic chemistry. Chemistry is my first love. And then my second degree is in biotechnology. I am aiming to go for my doctorate later on someday. But I'm more leaning towards more molecular biology and genetics, especially in cancer cells. So that would be the area that I would be working in. So I currently teach at Portsmouth, Great Bay Community College. I'm teaching as a general chemistry instructor. And then I'm also teaching human biology at NHCI, Concord. I started at NCC, Nashua Community College. And since we have a consortium of the colleges here, community colleges, so as an employee, I have this ability to move and make my own schedule. So I am, like they say, all over the place. This is my second time at Science Cafe. I was here when they had a session on tea, very interesting, enlightening session. And the tea also helped, the sampling that we had. Well, you're not going to have any demos or any sampling for this evening, but we will certainly have plenty of examples to keep you entertained. And like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm probably the least qualified among the panel. But if I don't know something, I have my laptop, and I have a very vivid imagination as well. So I will come up with an answer, or I can refer it to these three enlightened and distinguished ladies over here. So let's start.
So let's start with the pesticides. As opposed to pesticides, which can be very toxic in general, what are some of the ways we can use insect mating behaviors to cull, crop control and things like that?
The first thing that comes to mind, insects, obviously they're very small and they have a hard time finding each other. So moths will, they have really sophisticated systems to find each other using chemicals. So, for example, a female would produce a chemical signal, and that's how the male would find that female. So some very clever entomologists have figured out what those chemicals are, how to synthesize them in such high numbers that you can fill, say, an orchard with so much of that female sex pheromone that it confuses the male moths. They can't find the female moths. They can't mate and they can't lay eggs, and therefore are unable to cause damage in those crops. And that is actually one of the primary ways that codling moth is controlled in West Coast orchards. There's a few examples of moths that there is very little option for controlling that moth with pesticides because the life form that causes damage occurs below ground. So some of these, for example, there's a moth that attacks grape roots, grape root borer. They're really clever when they name these things. That insect spends most of its life below ground as a larvae, feeding on grape roots, and a very short period of time coming up and finding a mate. So mating disruption, not only has it been an effective way to control the pest without pesticides, it's really the only way to control the pest without pesticides.
So do the pesticide runoffs affect mating of fish?
There's been a lot of interest and focus on how fish reproductive systems are being affected by a lot of different chemicals that are in the runoff. Pesticides specifically, I don't necessarily think so, although if you have synthetic pheromones, that might be something of concern. However, one of the things that's that has a great impact on the fish reproduction is we tend to throw a lot of our drugs, women throw like their pills down the toilet, throw them away. They end up in the sewage system, which subsequently ends up out in the water. And so what ends up happening to a lot of fish populations, particularly those that live near shore, is they start having pretty much like a demasculization for a lot of the males. So there's estrogen in some of these pills that end up in the system. It gets into the fish's diet system, and they end up demasculized. And so what eventually happens is that they can't reproduce, and it can have quite an impact on the population as a whole. So that, I would say, is one of the ways that, not necessarily specifically pesticides, but other things that end up in the water system that, we forget that, if you put things down your toilet or you let things kind of spill on the asphalt, eventually it makes its way out into the water system, particularly out into the ocean. And so that's got a great impact in so many ways for ocean animals.
Okay, I have a question here in the middle.
Has there been any studies on how well we metabolize as human beings? Because we don't just flush the pills down the toilet. Things that we get rid of biologically go down the toilet in a lot larger degree. And how well are those things metabolized, and how much of these chemical residues are we passing into the system?
One of the things that we have to realize is that there is something called what's called bioaccumulation, and what fish do is they go out, they eat. If they're an herbivore, let's say they eat a bunch of algae, they're taking in some of the chemicals that the algae have sucked up from, whether it's the soil or from the water, and they're eating a lot of it, right? And then you get this other big fish that comes around, and it's going to eat that same fish, and it's getting the same chemicals, but it's eating a lot of those fish. So it's getting a pretty concentrated dose of those chemicals. As far as the specific chemicals, do you have a better idea about pharmaceuticals, about what may be persisting in the environment that could have ultimately, because we are the ultimate bioaccumulators, right? We're the ones going out eating these fish that have eaten other fish, that have eaten other fish. Exactly. And so we're getting high doses of whatever it is that they're accumulating. I mean, I know from a heavy metal standpoint, mercury is one of the main concerns, and I don't know if that's maybe what spurred this question, but if you eat a fish that lives for a long time, like swordfish, as wonderful as that can be, you don't have that on the menu, do you? So swordfish, they've been alive for a long time. They're eating tons of other fish. They accumulate all that mercury in their tissue. So when you eat swordfish, you have to be very careful, because you are ingesting that, and you are going to be breaking that down, and it is going to be getting into your tissues. But as far as pharmaceuticals, I'm not as clear about that.
Most of the pharmaceutical companies are now required to process their so-called the chemicals that they dispose of. But there is a study being conducted right now through an NIH grant that I am being part of, and we are testing the water samples from the states of New Hampshire and Maine, particularly the well water. And we are more interested in looking at the levels of arsenic, because arsenic has been linked with reduced developmental growth in humans, especially in growing children. That actually takes a look at 20 different types of metals that can be found in the water. And Dartmouth is doing the testing for us, and it's actually a partnership program that we are doing with high school students in New Hampshire and Maine. So hopefully, in coming months or weeks, I was hoping that we can have a get together and a meeting, and I have my teacher that I'm working with bring the students over here and present their analysis and their data that they have found. So yes, we do have 40% of our wells are not tested. So if you have those chemicals and those metals in the water, they will end up being consumed by the aquatic life, which includes fish, which includes all the amphibians as well, who use water as a resource, not only for their reproductive purposes, but also for gaining resources for their survival. I cannot come up with I think most of the pharmaceuticals are now, they have to treat their chemical disposal before they dump it into the water.
Question in the back here in the center.
So when I was a little girl, I was fascinated with seahorses because the males were the ones that reproduced and gave birth. Are there other fish or insects or birds that the male actually is the one that's doing the reproducing?
You may be able to find this on riverbanks. Bellistomatid bugs. They're kind of oval shaped and they've got these flippers. They're aquatic bugs. The female will lay her eggs on the back of the male, so he'll carry the eggs around before they hatch, and that's kind of the limit as far as parental care in insect worlds. But the male takes that burden.
There's actually several fish species where the males are sort of burdened with the task of caring for the offspring. I mean, if some of you are fishermen, you've probably grown up catching sunfish along the shoreline. The fish that are hanging out in the nests, the big kind of open areas that you see, those are the males. And it's not uncommon. There's several fish species where males will build this beautiful nest, nice open nest, entice the female to come in. The female will lay the eggs, and then the male will fertilize the eggs. And the female's like, yeah, see you later. Male has to stick around, care for the eggs until they hatch. And in some species, even when they're small little fry, the kind of teenager stage, they've kind of got to stick around as well. So besides the seahorse, where the male actually carries the eggs, on his own, there are several fish species, including all of the sunfish, where the males are sort of burdened with caring for the eggs inside of the nest, and the females are just kind of free to roam around. And that's very common, actually, in several kinds of fish.
It's less common in birds, but you definitely have some species of birds that show what's called sex role reversal, where the female is the one who looks really cool. She's brightly colored. She displays for males, and then the male is more drab, and she will lay an egg for him, and he'll incubate it and look after it, and she'll defend a big territory. She may have 3 or 4 males on her territory that are hers to mate with, but he's going to have to take whatever eggs she has and look after them. And I guess kind of on a related note, but a completely different species, is I was actually in a lab that worked on eastern hellbenders, which are these giant salamander type things that live in really nice, clear freshwater streams. And there they actually put out these nest boxes. So, and again, it's the males who they find a nest box and they hang out in it, and the female comes and lays her eggs, and he stays there with the eggs and he guards them and looks after them. Apparently, sometimes they actually eat all their eggs, which is a little upsetting. But again, it's the male who has to provide the parental care, and the female just drops off the eggs and then leaves.
Do fish smell? I mean, do they have a sense of an olfactory thing, and can they smell through the water?
That's a really great question. I actually did a study a couple of years ago where I was looking at how females may respond to various males based on their pheromones. So going back to this idea that there are different different individuals have different capabilities for handling pathogens in their environment, right? And so like humans, we have this variation where some of us can handle pathogens a lot better than others. So fish are the same way. Fish are our earliest vertebrate ancestors, so their immune system is very much like our own. So what we were interested in looking at was, well, if we have a female and she's got this particular genetic signature, and we have a male, two different males, one has a complementary signature and one has one that's not as complementary, would a female prefer one over the other? Well, the way that we tried to isolate that was say, well, let's just take the water that the male is in. And with our fish, the males, they're nesting males. So this is another fish. This is sunfish. So they have a nest. We've noticed that females go into the nest. They don't always lay eggs. So they're kind of checking the nests out. And are they looking at the nest, or is there a smell that the males are leaving behind? And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to look and see whether or not males from different nests perhaps are enticing females and attracting females because they have a particular smell that is reflective of what their genetic signature is. So a short answer to your question is that there is the ability for fish to smell, not smell in the sense that we know, but smells are molecules, right? They can take molecules in, and water can have plumes of molecules that are taken in by an olfactory system, and fish have olfactory systems. So we're pretty sure, and this is not just my study, but other studies as well, that females are responding to males based on their smells, and those smells are reflective of their genetic signature that tells how their immune system is and whether or not it's compatible with their own.
I've heard birds, some species mate for life. I hope that's true because I think it's really sweet. I guess what comes to mind is the emperor penguin. They can find their mate in this unbelievable mass of other penguins. And I don't know if you can put some enlightenment on that, like how do they do that? And I also wonder if there are certain species of fish that mate for life too.
So mating for life is rare in birds, but it does happen. So there are some species of, especially birds that are associated with the ocean more. So I'm not so sure. I'm less familiar with penguins, but like there are species of terns which you can often see out the coast, and they actually do mate for life. And so they'll come back every year and find the same male and female. They recognize each other, I think, mostly in penguins too. When they're coming back to a colony and they're trying to find their chick or their mate, they're recognizing them based on their sound. So they don't sing, but the certain call that they make, they can recognize them based on that. And then, for some of these seabirds like the terns, they also have to do, they have like a really complicated mating ritual where they do like a whole series of displays and movements, and they do them synchronously together. And so that's another way that they can help match up with their mate again.
So there are actually a few monogamous fish, and I think it's important to distinguish. There are different types of monogamy. There is lifetime monogamy, which is what we've been talking about. But there's also seasonal monogamy, where fish have breeding seasons, and so and birds do as well. And so there could be monogamous pairs that only last throughout the season. What's interesting, though, let me first answer about the fish. So fish, there are some that are monogamous. They happen to be parasitic. So the anglerfish, for example, in Finding Nemo, when the mask goes all the way down to the bottom and that crazy anglerfish comes out with the big mouth, that's an anglerfish. That's a female. The male is parasitic, and so the male actually latches on to the female and stays with the female for his entire life, fertilizing the female throughout. So it is monogamy, as scary as it sounds, in a weird way. But I would say more and more recently, especially as we gain more genetic information, a lot of the species that we thought were lifetime monogamous, whether it's fish, whether it's birds, we are finding more and more that they're not really as devoted, husband and wives as one would think. So we're able now to go into the nests of fish, into the nests of birds, look at the genes, and do paternity tests. And for the species that we always thought were at the very least seasonal monogamous, are not really. There's a lot of, Michelle is saying, these extra pair copulations, the female or even the male kind of sneaking on the side, the little cheaters, and it does happen. So I think that it's a very interesting field right now, and we're collecting more data, and sadly it's going the way of, things aren't quite as dead. They're not quite as devoted as we thought they were. That being said, there are some fish that are considered monogamous. The clownfish, for one, they've got a very limited area that they can be in. The female has an anemone. She lays her eggs there. Usually the males are pretty devoted to her. But once they die, another male will take that male's place.
I have one story to add from the insect world. Of course, mating for life is a lot easier if your life is very short. Some insect species actually don't even have mouth parts because the only thing they do as adults is find a mate and die. But another example, going back to how understanding mating behavior in insects contributes to a control, have you heard of sterile male technique before? The best example of this is actually, I think it's called the screwworm maggot. It affects cattle. And this was an invasive insect that came in from some southern parts of the Americas. And this insect mates once. Once she mates, she's satisfied and she'll go the rest of her life. So what they'll do is they'll breed these flies in huge, huge numbers, irradiate them, so they're completely capable of going out and leading rich, full lives, but they're sterile for a fly. So they'll go out and mate, and that female will be satisfied, and it really, really drives the population down. And this is a program that still exists. They're still rearing these flies and irradiating them and sterilizing them in plants down in Mexico. And so every time a problem crops up, say in Texas with this, they'll do another release of sterile males.
And there is a reason why we only have like 5 to 9% of mammalian species exhibiting a monogamous relationship, because monogamous relationship, and I'm talking about genetic monogamy now here, which limits the two mates genetically and they just reproduce, is because that reduces the reproductive fitness of an organism. And reproductive fitness of an organism is the ability to reproduce an offspring, to produce an offspring. So in animals and in organisms, reproductive fitness is seen as a plus point. So a mate who is not showing reproductive fitness and during a monogamous relationship, that decreases. So the 100% monogamous relationships are very rare to find. So just like I mentioned, social monogamy is more prevalent because that lets both mates to go out of their relationship and exhibit that reproductive, or maintain, let's see, that reproductive fitness. So you have to think in terms of, what is best for their survival, and how we look on that is completely different.
We're going to take a little breather now.